Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today we're learning how old school fundamentals can actually help you become a better photographer in today's digital first world. Hey everybody, I am Raymond Hatfield. I'm your host, and I'm excited to be here today because over the past few years, if you've been in photography for the past several years, that there's been a transition between film and digital, and today digital is definitely prevalent, right, in the world that we shoot in. Film is, well, it was on the decline, but it's slowly starting to come back up. But the point here is that there's a lot of things that we learned as photographers. I guess there's a lot of things that were taught by photographers when shooting film that today can still be applied. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you like new stuff? And the answer is yes, of course. Everybody loves new stuff, right? There's a new phone that comes out every year. Everybody loves getting a new car. There's that new Sony, Canon, Nikon, Fuji Pro Z9R Mark IV that everybody is lusting over because it is so beautiful, right? And it's on the cusp of digital technology and innovation, right? These are just all buzzwords. But at the same time, everybody also loves old stuff. And what I mean by that is that people love classic cars. They love fine china, antiques, that Mickey Mantle rookie card, right? 40-year-old film cameras. People love old things. And whether it's nostalgia or it's something else, our reason for choosing something old over something new typically means that we have to make certain sacrifices. With classic cars, they are definitely beautiful. They're powerful, but they have garbage suspension. It's not good at all. You're not taking any turns in those things unless you have modern equipment. Cool film cameras. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how much I would love to own a Leica M6, right? Something, I know that that's considered probably more of a modern film camera, but the point is that these cool film cameras, while they're beautiful, even like the newer ones that are new, relatively new, they still have like garbage autofocus systems. And with film, obviously, there's no way to change your ISO on the fly without removing the entire roll of film and replacing it with a new roll at a different sensitivity. But some of the old things are not only better, but they can provide a deeper sense of understanding. Nowhere, I think, is that more apparent than, well, probably agriculture, but also photography. So today, you are going to learn the two oldest tricks in the book for nailing your exposure and focus every single time. I hope you're ready to get into the zone. Okay, that was actually a pretty bad joke. That sounded way better in my head. And if you know where this is going, then I guess that joke makes sense, but I just realized that you are. Anyway, growing up, right, I had a stepdad who, he rebuilt a 69 Chevelle SS, and this thing was beautiful. It had I still remember, I was like 7 or 8, possibly. Had a 396 in it. It was a white paint with a black vinyl top. I mean, it was a beautiful car, very powerful. And through that process of my dad rebuilding this car, he taught me things like how to change a car's oil, how to change spark plugs, make sure that they were gapped correctly, and then just other types of just general maintenance and repair skills. Now, those things that he taught me, they're not yet lost in today's world, but they are lost in tomorrow's world. Because cars with no engines means no spark plug, no engine means no oil. So these skills of learning how to change your car's oil and spark plugs, these skills will eventually become useless to have. People may be able to hold on to them for another 50 years, maybe even my entire lifetime, I'm not sure. But eventually, there's going to be no more combustion engines, and they will become useless skills to have. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, that's cool, but what does this have to do with photography? And I think that the difference between cars and photography, though, is that the fundamentals of how photography works, well, it won't change. Even though you could, I guess, compare the transition from film to digital with the transition from combustion engines to electric motors, the fundamentals of how photography works is exactly the same. Okay, right. Okay, what does this mean for your photography? Right, okay. Let me get back to that. So when film was prevalent, the number of photos that you could take essentially was limited to how much film you had. And that meant that the better you were at reading light that you saw in front of you with your own eyes and then determining the exposure, the better your photo would turn out in fewer frames, meaning that you wouldn't need to take as many photos of a scene, which meant that then you could photograph more scenes. But without LCD screens, with that instant preview of our photos, without histograms, without the robust metering modes that we have on today's camera, without being able to shoot in RAW so that you could fix it in Lightroom later, how in the world did photographers read light and determine exposure to capture incredibly beautiful and dynamic images? Now, if you're new to photography, just try to imagine for a moment going out and taking a bunch of photos without being able to see what they look like until that next day. That can be difficult because I know even myself today at a wedding as a professional, I oftentimes will look at the back of my camera at a wedding to just make sure that I got the exposure right. So how did these masters of photography do it back in the day? Again, without the screens, without being able to look at an instant scientific readout of the amount of light through a histogram. Well, without today's technology that we all rely on to capture that perfect photo, photographers used what was called, okay, here's where that joke came in, the zone system. Right, get it? Let's get into the zone. Okay, zone system. Okay. And if you were able to implement the zone system in your photography today, you would be able to I don't want to make any bold promises here, but I would be willing to bet that you would be able to drastically cut down on your editing time because your photos would be just coming out of the camera so much better. Now, the zone system, let's go ahead and discuss this a little bit, right? The zone system was developed by Ansel Adams in the 1930s. And even though photography has made massive changes since then, this technique of using the zone system is still used today with digital photographers to achieve incredible results. So what is the zone system? The zone system is this. Okay, so your camera sensor or your film stock, if you're shooting on film, only has so much dynamic range. What is dynamic range? Dynamic range is the difference between the brightest and the darkest thing in your frame. Now, some sensors have 10 stops of dynamic range, and others have 12 or 14. Now, let's see if we can picture this in our heads. If you've ever taken a photo outside, if you've ever been outside and you went to go take a photo and the sky was so bright that your subject, say a person or building or whatever, was a silhouette, or you've ever been inside and taking photos, but the windows in the photos were so bright that you just couldn't see anything out of them, even though when you pull the camera down, you can clearly see inside the house and outside the windows. Then your camera sensor just doesn't have a very high dynamic range. And in fact, just kind of side note here, that term HDR, high dynamic range, is when you merge several photos together of different exposures so that you can get the brightest brights and the darkest darks all in one image once it's stitched together digitally. So not done in one exposure. For one exposure, we need to use the zone system to maximize our frame. So the zone system is simply a way of creating more accurate exposures by taking into account that dynamic range of our cameras. So this ranges from zone 0, which is pure black, no detail whatsoever, all the way up to zone 10, which is pure white. Again, no detail whatsoever. And would you have a wild guess at what zone 5 is? What's the halfway point between pure black and pure white? You got it. I can hear you screaming at your car radio right now, at your headphones, at the gym. Middle gray. It's gray. That's right. You're absolutely right. So gray is how your camera wants to expose everything, because when in auto mode, your camera doesn't think that you want to take a picture of something that is pure white, and it doesn't think that you want to take a picture of something that is pure black. So again, your camera tries to make everything a gray tone because that's a halfway point between overexposed white and underexposed black. And here's a fun exercise. Here's one of those things that you don't really notice until you know about it. If you ever look online at like a photo of a white car, you'll notice that the whole photo looks very underexposed. And if you really pay attention and try to look at the color of the car, your eye says, oh, that's a white car. I'm sorry, your brain says, oh, that's a white car. But if you really, hold on, take a moment and look at that photo, you'll see that the entire photo is underexposed and the white car is actually gray because it's darker. So if you are, and I guess this is just all to say that a camera doesn't really know what it's taking a picture of. They leave that up to you. So when you're taking a portrait of a rock, beautiful rock portrait, your camera is going to properly expose it because generally rocks are gray. So that works, But if you're not always taking photos of rocks, well, this is where the zone system comes in. So taking a portrait of somebody who is light-skinned, your camera will want to, just like in that car example, your camera's actually going to want to underexpose them to make their skin tones darker, closer to gray. So what you will want to do is actually overexpose them by about a stop because fair skin tones are about a zone 6. So remember, on the scale from 0, black, to 10, white, 5 is gray. So fair skin is just about one stop overexposed at zone 6. And on the opposite side of that, if somebody has dark skin, your camera will actually want to overexpose to turn their skin tones brighter or closer to gray. So again, you will want to actually underexpose your portrait from what your camera says is a proper exposure by about a stop because the skin tone is closer to a zone 4. Now, again, you may be thinking, well, hold on, there's a lot of information. Not only is this a brand new thing, but everything has its own zone, and we have to remember what zone we're talking about here. Here's kind of an easy way to think about this, right? So first, I guess let me ask you, you might be thinking, how do you even measure the light to figure out what zone something should be in? Now, everybody's camera, if it's a digital camera, has a built-in light meter. And maybe you've seen it at the bottom of your viewfinder. When you look in it, it's either green or it's red, and then there's a 0, and then on one side it says +1, +2, +3, and then on the other side it says -1, -2, -3. That is your camera's light meter. And what that is doing is telling you how over or underexposed the camera thinks that your photo is. So with that light meter, there are different types of metering modes. You can tell your camera, look at the entire frame, and then meter that way. And that's generally what auto modes do because it doesn't want to overexpose or underexpose anything specific. But there are other metering modes like center weighted and spot. Now, center weighted I find works pretty good for the majority of stuff that I do, but some cameras the zone is bigger, some cameras the zone is smaller. So what I would suggest is actually changing your camera's metering mode to spot metering. Spot metering, okay? Now, what that will have your camera do is then it will only read the amount of light, the intensity of light in the centermost, about 5% of the image, like pinpoint right in the center. So when we're going to take a photo, here's how you would use it with the zone system. When you're going to take a photo, look at the scene with your eyes. Ask yourself, what is the subject here, okay? Maybe it is a rock. I don't know. We'll just use a person in this example, right? You point your camera at that subject right in the middle, and then you adjust your camera so that it says that the photo is properly exposed. Now ask yourself, wait a second, is my subject gray? If it is, great, take the photo. Good exposure. If they're not, you adjust up or down. Are you photographing a waterfall? Now, do you want the water coming over the edge to look gray, or do you want it to look white? I'm guessing you probably want it to look white. So if your camera says, again, for example, that f8, ISO 400, and a shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second is properly exposed, to make that waterfall more white, so like zone 8-ish, because again, like a white waterfall, your camera's going to want to expose it so that it looks gray. If you want it to look white, that's going to be about zone 8. Okay? So gray is going to be in zone 5. So that means that you would want to change your settings to allow in 3 additional stops of light. Now in this case, you could lower your shutter speed 3 stops. So you were at 1/2000th of a second, so you lower it to 1/1000th, 1/500th, 1/250th of a second. That's 3 stops. 1,500, 250. That is 3 stops of light more that you're letting into the camera. And now you've properly exposed the scene in front of you for how you wanted to capture it. Because the way that you see the scene is this bright, beautiful waterfall with white, I don't know, I guess it's like air bubbles and stuff, right? Over a waterfall. Regardless, right? You wanted it to look like that, and you didn't want it to look underexposed and gray. So now you were able to use the zone system to see how the camera sees the scene in front of you, but then also adjust it to capture it how you see the scene in front of you. Now, when you go ahead and adjust your settings, plus 3 stops, right? Now you don't have to worry about the exposure of anything else in your frame because your subject will be properly exposed. The photo isn't about the trees off to the side. The photo isn't about the pool of water down at the bottom. While you're definitely going to get all those things in the frame, the real subject is the waterfall. So only worry about the exposure of the waterfall and let everything else fall where it falls. Now, I know that this was a very brief, audible lesson on getting started with the zone system, and maybe it's difficult to imagine. I'd probably think so. Now that I went through and I explained that, I learned the zone system actually in film school. So we did a lot of looking at photographs and the different tones. So you can Google zone system in photography, and there's a lot of great information about it. But again, what it does is it allows you to get a better exposure every single time without having to look at your camera screen, because the camera screen, depending on the lighting conditions that you're in, could be either too bright or too dark and can cause your exposure to be wildly off. Now, again, these things could be fixed in Lightroom, but then that means that you have to spend that time to fix things in Lightroom. So getting closer to shooting it right in camera is the ultimate goal, I think, in photography, because if you want to learn how to do something, you have to learn how to do it. And the zone system allows you to do it almost without any additional help. So, again, if you want more information, I would definitely recommend that you Google zone system, just so that you can see what the tones are for what zones, and then try it for yourself. But try it on something stationary. Something moving might be in changing light, and it's not going to be easy to accomplish. All right, so that was the zone system. The next old school method that still works today is called, you ready for this? It's called zone focusing. Now, the name is purely coincidental, and it has no affiliation actually with the zone system, I believe. Okay, anyway, this one should, I think, be a little bit easier to understand. And it's one of those, I don't know, like when I think about this issue, I think about, like, how would this be sold to me online, right? Like, how would somebody describe this on TV? And it would probably be something like, do you hate missing focus? Do your loved ones get mad at you when you capture the perfect moment, but you focused on that tree behind them rather than their beautiful face? Do you wish there was a simple system that would make it easy to capture the things that you love in incredible detail and focus? Well, now there is with zone focusing. You just set it, and I don't know if I can finish that, actually. I think that phrase is trademarked. I'm not sure if I can say that. But anyway, it's kind of like my Billy Mays sell pitch right there for zone focusing. So zone focusing, again, to understand it, we actually have to understand what depth of field is first and how it works. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that in a landscape photo, maybe it's a beautiful mountain range or whatever, everything is in focus, from that tree just a few feet in front of the camera all the way back to the mountain range a mile, 2, 4, 5 miles back. Everything is perfectly in focus. It's sharp, it's detailed. But then you see a portrait online where the person's eye closest to the camera is in focus, but the other eye is out of focus. Like, how does that happen? How in one photo do you get everything in focus? In another photo, you get only one eye in focus. That is that called your depth of field. That is the difference in depth of field right there. How much is in focus? Your depth of field is the range of how much in front of your camera is in what they call acceptable focus. So what I mean by acceptable focus is that on your camera lens, there isn't like when you go to focus on something, it will focus a few feet out. It doesn't focus on from 2 feet to infinity. Like, that's not an option. It focuses at a certain distance, and then everything either before that or after that is also in focus. Now, the elements that control your depth of field are your focal length, so what lens you're using, your subject's distance from your camera, the focus distance like we just talked about right there, and your aperture. So a wide focal length, like 16 millimeter lens, will have more in focus when focusing at the same distance than an 85 millimeter lens. And an 85 millimeter lens will have more in focus at a certain focus distance than a 200 millimeter lens. So again, the wider your focal length, the more you will have in focus. Now, the next important aspect is aperture, as what aperture you use affects your depth of field, and again, how much is in focus, regardless of the lens that you use. And it's much easier to blur out your background with an aperture of f2 than it is f16, because at f2 you have a shallower depth of field, regardless of the lens that you're using, than you would at f16. So zone focusing, okay, this is where it gets fun. Zone focusing works by choosing settings that will give you a larger or more optimal depth of field so that everything within a certain range will be in focus. So just to be perfectly clear here, zone focusing is putting your lens in manual focus and then changing other settings on your lens that will affect how much will be in focus. So we all know, I'll try to give you an example here, that autofocus is probably weakest in low light situations, like specifically a wedding reception, dance floor, right? Now, before I started using the zone system, or the zone focusing, my lens, when I would go to take photos on the dance floor, it would just hunt back and forth, trying to find something, back and forth. And then by the time it did find focus, well, that moment that I was trying to capture, like, it was already over, because it would take 3, 4, 5 seconds to find focus, and that's just not acceptable when things are moving fast and people are having fun. Now, at a wedding reception, I'm on the dance floor with guests, so I know that the subjects that I'm photographing, the people who I'm photographing, are between 3 and about 13 feet away. Like, far enough to where if I reached out, they'd just be just out of my grasp and about 13 feet away, okay? They're within that range. If I'm on the dance floor, I'm not taking photos of anybody closer than 3 feet, and I'm not taking pictures of anybody further than 13 feet away. Now, you can find, to help you do this, you can find a depth of field calculator online to know what lens, aperture, and what focusing distance you need to set your lens to. So, to give you an example, I love using my 23 millimeter lens on my Fuji cameras. So according to the depth of field calculator, if I shoot at f8 and set my lens's focusing distance to 6 feet away, everything between 3.8 feet away from my camera and 13.2 feet away from my camera will be in perfect focus. That means that my depth of field is 9.3 feet. Everything in that 9.3 foot range between 3.8 feet and 13.2 feet away from my camera will be perfectly in focus, and I don't have to use autofocus. I can just keep my settings the same. I don't even have to manually focus my lens. I just set it to 6 feet, and then I just forget it. I just keep taking photos, right? Hope I don't get sued for that. So now, again, as another example, those same settings, right? Aperture of f8, and if I focused my lens's focusing distance at 6 feet away, if that was on a 50 millimeter lens, I would only have a depth of field. My depth of field would go down from 9.3 feet to 1.4 feet. So somebody has to be between 5.4 feet away from my camera and 6.7 feet away from my camera. If they're any closer than 5.4 feet, they're out of focus. If they're any further than 6.7 feet, they're out of focus. Now this right here, and the only difference is that I used a longer lens, a 50 millimeter lens. And this is why more wider walk-around lenses work best for zone focusing. Now, on a nice day, if you're, say, walking around town, you're exploring, you might be shooting at, f16. It's a bright day. If you're still using that 23 millimeter lens, which is a fantastic focal length to just walk around, kind of all-around capture lens on a crop sensor, so 35 on full-frame sensor, then at f16 of your aperture, everything, get this, from 2.7 feet in front of your camera to, well, infinity will be in focus. So as long as something is more than 2.7 feet away from your camera, it's going to be in focus. No autofocus required. You just go out and you just snap away. The only thing that you think about is your exposure. No having to worry about autofocus. Zone focusing allows you to capture the right moment quicker without having to wait for your camera to find focus. Now you may be wondering, why doesn't everybody do this now? Like this, why don't people do this? And the answer is, honestly, because camera autofocus has gotten phenomenal. It's gotten really, really good. But there are still situations in which you miss photos because of the autofocus. And when you miss those photos, it's devastating. It's those ones that stand out to you probably more than the ones that you get in focus. So learning how to do some of those old school techniques really helps out. So I want you to play around with a depth of field calculator online and see for yourself. There's a million of them. All you got to do is just Google depth of field calculator and you can see for yourself. If you learn how to do this, you could make focusing much easier on yourself. Now, again, while we have this incredible technology in today's cameras, there are just some times that old school methods work best. And when things feel complicated, there's often a really, really simple answer that we can't see because we're just too deep into trying to figure out how to make something work with its constraints. And then we feel like, well, if we can't figure this out, this super complex thing, then we're not a real photographer. But in fact, I have personally seen that those who are the most successful, quote unquote, real photographers are those who just have the simplest methods. Now, your homework for the week is to try out zone focusing. Again, Google depth of field calculator, enter in your lens, your aperture, and your focusing distance details, and then it's going to give you that info. And then I just want you to walk around your backyard with those settings and only photograph objects within that range and see how easy it is to capture perfect focus without having to hunt. That Leica M6 that I told you earlier, that's kind of like the Rolls Royce, I guess you could say, or Ferrari of film cameras. There's no autofocus. It's fully manual. It doesn't even have a battery. Like, it is fully manual camera. And it sells for more than most full-frame cameras do today. Easily selling for $2,500, $2,600 just for the body. Old film camera. No modern features. No autofocus. Nothing. And to be able to use something like that, you need to have a better understanding of photography. You can't rely on those digital tools to capture a great photo. Photography isn't necessarily... Ooh, I just had a thought there. How does this work? If you treat photography as a complement to your life, right? If you treat photography as a complement to how you see the world, photography isn't the end game. Like, that's not the goal. The goal isn't to get great photographs. The goal is just to be present in your life and capture photographs of the things that happen in your life. So ideally, we want the camera to be as transparent as possible. We want the camera to just be an extension of ourselves. And when we're trying to figure out menus and dials and buttons and settings and all that stuff, it gets in the way. So these cameras, like full manual cameras, are really appealing to a lot of photographers because it allows them to be fully present in the situation that they're in and then just allow their camera to capture the photos. That turned out good. I think I have to refine that more, but I like that. Let me know if that made sense to you. This podcast is nothing if you don't do anything about it. If you don't do anything with what you've learned. If you don't do anything but listen on your way to work. Listen while you're at the gym. Listen while you're, brushing your teeth, bathing the kids, doing the laundry, whatever it is. If you just listen, you're not going to do anything. So listen and then do. All right? That's it for this week. Stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Start a conversation. Grow together. That is it for this week. Remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.